Ladies and gentlemen, for the next little while, our MC and moderator is Joe Bessignon. And Joe, thank you for your leadership in our community. Volunteer of the Year last year, 2 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Bessignon.
Thank you, Nolan. All this technology we talked about, we only have one working urinal in the building. But it only works 9 till 4:30, right? For now. We had a pretty eventful morning, I've got to say. Lots to think about, lots to chew on, no question. And our next keynote speaker, I think, is going to give us some things to think about. It's Madeline Ashby. Madeline is a science fiction writer and a futurist living in Toronto. Her most recent novel, Company Town, was a Canada Reads finalist and was nominated for the Locus Award, the Prix Aurora, and the Sunburst Award. She has developed science fiction prototypes for Intel Labs, the Institute for the Future, Sci-Futures, Nesta, Data and Society, and the Atlantic Council. She also facilitates strategic foresight workshops around the globe. She holds a master's degree in strategic foresight and innovation. Madeline, if you will join us. There she is. Big hand. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So I can't really walk around. I don't have a wireless mic, but I'll be reading from my phone. There are no slides. Similar to the urinal issues, there are issues with Keynote versus PowerPoint. So yeah, c'est la vie. So I guess, and the clock has started. Okay, great. So, no, I just didn't want to start off time. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a delight to be here. This is my first time in Edmonton. It's my first time in St. Albert. I was thrilled to be invited, and I've been extremely delighted by what I've seen this morning so far. The ideas that are at play have been things that I've been thinking about. It's nice to know that other Canadians are thinking about them in other provinces. I live my life in Toronto when I'm not on airplanes, and but I was born in the city of Los Angeles and spent most of my growing up years outside of Seattle, in Twin Peaks country, actually. So I'm thrilled to be here and to be sharing sort of these thoughts about the future with all of you. So, I greatly appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that we leave here with some more ideas and more strategies for making those ideas happen. For those of you who don't know me, I guess sort of the introduction already covered it. I'm a science fiction writer, which I'm sure we'll talk about later after this talk is done. If you have questions about that, I would love to hear them. If you have questions about Canada Reads, please ask me. And in addition to sort of being a science fiction writer and being a futurist, I am also a teacher. We've talked a lot about education today, and I am a sessional lecturer at both OCAD University and Ryerson. So I deal with students on a fairly regular basis who are sort of from freshmen to grad students, actually, which really will give you a lot of insight in terms of what they are thinking about, and it's actually one of the best, I think one of the best things that you can do for the future is work with younger people, and work with young people in general, and it'll give you a lot of insight into what people are concerned about and also what's actually happening. However, before we get into remarks, I have to do the thing that I learned in those educational environments, so I want to first, I want to respectfully acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Nakota Sioux, the Iroquois, the Dene, the Ojibwe, the Saulteaux, and the Anishinaabe. the Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence both Alberta and the wider community of Turtle Island. A lot of conversations about innovation tend to involve talking about who was the first to do something. And so it's important that we acknowledge the people who were the first to innovate in Canada. Without their ideas, their intelligence, their wit, their resiliency, Canada would not be what it is today. We can't have Canada without the birch bark canoe. It was one of the most important innovations in our country's history. So I want to acknowledge that as we are talking about this sort of what's next. I'm about to go celebrate Canada 150 in Ottawa. Yeah, some friends very graciously invited us to come stay with them. Other writers, we sort of move in packs. So I'm mindful of that as we approach Canada 150. And this talk is sort of, some thoughts about innovations that Canadians have brought to the fore and the innovations that they could be working on. We've talked a lot about the innovation of things versus the innovation of ways, which I think is a beautiful way to think about this. And I think also it's now time, given the state of the world, it is now time to start thinking about a uniquely Canadian approach to innovation. What is it that we do? What is it that we are good at? What is it that we are good at pinpointing and exploring and figuring out? What are we good at doing? And this talk is sort of about that. And it's from the perspective of someone who feels very lucky to live here and who has seen a bunch of different approaches to innovation, both through my education and in my work experience and having come from another country. So, however, I will caution you, some of you may have followed my columns in the Ottawa Citizen a while ago, so if you've tracked along with those, I'm sorry, some of this will be old material. I think it's important to recognize that Canada has already brought a lot of sort of world-changing ideas to fruition. A lot of people don't know how many things were invented in Canada. I know that a lot of Canadians are sort of proud of the things that they know about, like basketball and so on, but it's more than just that. So, a brief history. Before I started in Foresight, actually, I was a history major. I was training to be an historian. I thought that that was going to be my life. And so it sort of gave me this idea of finding the historical background before we look forward. I think that's really important to do in this discipline in general. It also taught me to look at things like material culture and sort of how people relate to each other at the level of the text and at the level of artifacts. Artifacts tell us so much about a culture, about a society, about the level of technology that they use. So thinking about it from that perspective, I want to sort of use that as a backdrop before we jump into even more interesting things. So, Reginald Fessenden, who left Canada so he could work for Thomas Edison, helped develop the radio telephony, the bipin connector, and early forms of sonar. A variant of what eventually became the gas mask was invented by a physician in the Newfoundland Regiment in 1915, just 2 months after the first gas attack on French and Canadian soldiers on the Western Front. So 2 months. We talk about rapid prototyping, but we don't talk about sometimes how necessary sometimes that is. Medical insulin was invented by Canadians in 1922, and before that, think about not even 100 years ago. Death sentence. Think about life before insulin, which wasn't life. Pablum, the instant cereal that helped end rickets and other symptoms of malnutrition in children, was invented at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto in 1931. It was instant, it was hypoallergenic, it could be easily distributed everywhere, all you needed to do was add water, and suddenly kids were walking and talking they couldn't. The plexiglass wouldn't have been made practical without the discoveries made at McGill University, also in 1931. The first practical electron microscope was built by Canadians in 1939. Now they're used to do live cell imaging on cancer cells so we can monitor our own health in real time. In 1950, a team of Canadians invented the green polyethylene garbage bag. This may in fact be my favorite. It's an invention so effective and so popular that designers are now doing everything they can to help rid us of them. Think about that. You invent a thing, and it takes off to the point where we are now trying to engineer it out of existence, much like the car, right? And my other favorite, well, however, I want to add to that, the fact that we are now trying to engineer out of existence, or make less necessary, something that changed sanitation practices all over the world. Without garbage bags, like germs, bacteria, decaying biomass, all of those things had to be burnt. It spread germs everywhere. Like, we really changed the face of public health with one garbage bag, right? But it's this tiny thing. You wouldn't think about it. You don't think about it. It's incredibly commonplace, like the ability to get insulin, like kids having instant cereal. So what do all those things have in common? They are all opportunities to do good. They are all invisible contributions to society. They are so good that they become part of the social fabric. Because it is more than just basketball. It's more than just the jockstrap, which was also a Canadian invention. It's more than just the snowmobile. It's more than just the Avro Arrow or the BlackBerry. All of these inventions and innovations, what all of these inventions and innovations have in common is that they changed the world quietly but significantly. They saved lives. They created jobs. And they quickly became, as I said, part of that social fabric, part of the lived experience, the artifacts of everyday life. What we would once call a household name. And I believe that Canada has the opportunity to do that again, but on a grander scale. However, we have to first reconsider the very foundations of the Canadian economy. Canada, as we know, began as a resource economy and has continued to be so. According to Harold Innis and W.A. McIntosh's Staples thesis, Canada's abundant national resources, national, I believe I may have just coined a new term, have shaped not just its economic history, but the history of urban planning and regional cultures across the country. According to their heartland versus hinterland model, resources flow out from rural areas and into urban spaces where they turn into money that then feeds the tax base that then keeps the lights on. Those resources might be cod, they might be wheat, they might be softwood lumber. Once upon a time, they were furs. And soon, oil might join the list of resources that Canada once depended on to fuel its economy that have since been replaced. Now, let me explain why I think this is. As a person who does strategic foresight, I have to watch for signals and trends regarding certain issues or how certain issues are developing. Which means I basically just pay a lot of attention to science news, to technology news, to real estate news, actually, and other sort of economic news. Here are some signals from this year regarding the future of energy. In March of this year, Shell Oil announced that they would be selling $4.1 billion worth of oil sands back to Canada. That was most of their Canadian oil resources. Shell were not the only ones. Marathon and ExxonMobil have canceled or written down Canadian oil sands projects. In other energy sectors, the price of solar continues to fall. Between 2010 and 2015, the installed cost of solar panels for residential rooftops fell 5% and 12% for industrial usage. But in the 15 years that solar panels have enjoyed mass market production, the total energy capacity of solar panels has increased by 5,700%. That's 227 gigawatts, and it's only going up. In fact, in India, the cost of solar energy is so low that the country has recently canceled plans to build almost 14 gigawatts worth of coal-fired power stations. The competition for the Indian energy market is so fierce that energy companies are writing extremely low tariffs, as low as 2.44 rupees per kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, in the United Arab Emirates, the Dubai Clean Energy Strategy for 2050 includes building the world's largest solar energy farm, 77 square kilometers of solar panels. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, commenting on Twitter, claimed that it was time to, quote, celebrate the last barrel of oil. The government has chosen to focus on education and technology so that when the last barrel of oil leaves their shores, the economy will remain strong. All of these are signals from just this year. But in reality, the writing has been on the wall for years. The planet is getting warmer. The science is clear. 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong. The human consumption of fossil fuels is leading to the melting of ice caps. The warming of oceans is bleaching coral reefs. Rising rates of insect-borne diseases like Zika and Lyme are a consequence, and so are the droughts that lead to both famine in the case of Sudan and civil war in the case of Syria. The carbon bubble, as Alex Steffen calls it, is about to burst. It might take a while. It might be like a slow deflation, like the Toronto real estate bubble. But when Shell Oil sells Canada its own oil sands back, it is time to start thinking about how worthwhile an investment it really is. And I understand that this might be devastating for some of you to hear, but I think that that devastation is nothing new to Canada's history. This happened to Newfoundlanders with the cod. It happened in British Columbia with lumber and with fish. South of the border, we've seen it happen in the Appalachians with coal. Right now, it's happening in small towns all over Canada as companies like Nestle buy up their water supplies and sell them wholesale south of the border in plastic bottles that were made with petrochemicals that we helped manufacture. This is the consequence of being a resource economy. This is the consequence of creating and selling staples. Eventually, the world needs different staples. Once upon a time, people couldn't imagine a world without whale oil, or they thought that ivory would remain on the market forever. Electric light was viewed with extreme suspicion when it was introduced to major urban centers. And during the Kennedy administration, less than half of Americans supported a manned mission to the moon. The time to try something new is not when you feel comfortable. The time to try something new is when it scares you. It's when you have something to lose, because then you'll work to make it real. So, what's the alternative? How does Canada remain competitive? And in a world with so much hurt and so much uncertainty, how do we find opportunity without becoming opportunistic? Here are the opportunity spaces I see going forward. 1, improving energy grids and making them safer for greener sources of energy. Those greener sources of energy are just going to arrive. You can't stop them. As we've heard, the way to lead is to get out in front and pursue your own ideas without waiting for permission, right? So those green energy initiatives are going to start. We also have to figure out a way to make the infrastructure around them incredibly secure. Not only is it easy to let energy grids fall into disrepair, but those grids are vulnerable to cyber attack. Yesterday, a fleet of Maersk container vessels was taken hostage by ransomware called Petya, disrupting shipping and trade routes all over the world. A few months ago, it was a hospital, and before that, it was a hotel. Imagine living in Yellowknife and having your power grid taken hostage by ransomware in the middle of winter, as actually happened in the Ukraine. Canada could be developing new technologies to make people who use electricity, which is to say everyone around the world, safer and more secure. It's not just about developing the energy, it's making sure we keep it. Well, 2, manufacturing the oncoming wave of self-driving cars. It's not just about having these self-driving cars, it's about being the country that builds them. There are prototyping spaces, actually some are being investigated in Toronto right now, for all of these autonomous vehicles, for autonomous vehicle zones. But those vehicles have to come from somewhere, and we already have the factories. They're already there. It's a shovel-ready project, as we would say. 3, Developing custom genetic medicines and CRISPR-related genetic engineering techniques in the context of universal healthcare. The future of bespoke medicine and gene therapy is exciting, and it will save lives, and it will help people live longer, and it will improve quality of life. But it has to do those things for everybody. And we are the people who know how to do that. We have a moral responsibility to make sure that every Canadian has access to those things. And we can prove that it can be done for everyone. Another, I've lost count, in case you can't tell. Establishing blockchain contracts that would grant Canadians the rights and freedoms that they want, whether it's group marriage, preserving land, artistic license in estates, estate planning, or debt. Especially as trade relationships covered by NAFTA may change, it's time to reconsider how local governments can shift towards specialized, sustainable agreements that are private and hashed between people. That ledger can control a lot of different things, from the value of currency to the length of your marriage. You know, hopefully they're equally balanced. I don't know, but it's a cool thing to think. It's a cool thing to think about. It's a cool thing to sort of imagine how those technologies might influence private arrangements or private trade agreements. Right now, the government strategy dealing with the United States is to go into individual communities and individual states and talk to individual mayors and individual governments. That's what the Trudeau government is doing right now around trade. They're not dealing with the states as a monolithic entity. They're dealing with it as the states, the individual states. And I think that sort of renegotiating those things with the available technology is where things are going to go. Also, I think we need to bring this engineering mindset to agriculture. For too long, Canada's farmers and other farmers around the world have been left behind when it comes to the tech and innovation booms. They've been held hostage to seed companies with DRM agreements. And they've been held hostage by firmware upgrades to their own tractors. You know, you have to ask John Deere to update your tractor? Really, it happens. You have to ask Monsanto to grow more seeds? Is that a way to feed a country? Is that a way to feed a world? Is that a way to get work done? No. And they've also watched their own pollinators be decimated by pesticides that should have been made illegal years ago. We need to pay attention to Canadian farms and to to how climate change is impacting them, because it's going to happen. Another favorite of mine, another favorite opportunity space of mine, preparing for antibiotic resistance at every level. Antibiotic resistance is a threat to our entire way of life. As a healthcare issue, it has the potential to undermine how doctors perform surgery, how people give birth, and even how we deal with just ordinary infections. Combined with a trend towards suspicion of vaccination, we may be facing a massive health crisis in the form of diminished herd immunity and entirely preventable vulnerabilities to pandemic flus and infections. Think about that as healthcare shifts, about how we're going to deal with the end of antibiotics, or the end of most antibiotics. There's a huge opportunity to do good there. Also, I think that we are moving into greater enhanced defense. I think that defending a country whose population could fit inside the state of California in a landmass this size is going to be incredibly interesting. And I'm sure minds are already spinning around that. And I would be remiss, lastly, if I didn't mention as an opportunity space, the arts. As an artist, it's important to me. But in fact, the arts is now more of an innovation testing bed than ever before. The best way to share Canada with the rest of the world is through the work of our artists. By supporting them here, we can share our vision, our values with everyone, everywhere. We can tell people what it is to be Canadian, what Canada is. And we can do it with more arts funding and with more arts investment and with greater support of artists. We can also show how diverse those artists actually are, that there isn't one vision of Canada. This is a bugbear for me, so sorry. Thank you for indulging. What all of these opportunities have in common is that they are opportunities to do good. They are all things that can get embroidered into the social fabric, not just here, but elsewhere. Can Canada meet those opportunities head on? Yes. But it is going to require change in how we do business. These are the priorities as I see them. 1, innovating immigration to make it faster, smoother, more equitable, and more attractive. Really, if you were born here, I exhort you, please go to GC. Go to the immigration website. Just try it. Just give it a whirl. Really just think about you as a person who are trying to stay with your family, trying to get out of a dangerous place, trying to find a job, trying to find a new life, and try filling out a form there. Just try it, and see if you then want to go read a book about service design. If we want to do these things, we need talent. We need to attract it. We need to not repel it. 2, closing the wage gap. Despite Canada's strides towards progress, wage gaps still exist at the gender and color levels. Women working full-time in Canada still earn 72 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And we can't really bring this country into the 21st century if we're operating on a retrograde pay scale. And we won't get the full fruit or the full effort from half of our workforce if they are constantly being undervalued. And if they can't come back and participate after having had a child. Because those things, those, sort of initiatives, those policies punish fathers too. They punish everybody. They punish children. They punish children as well. So it's important to think about closing those gaps, and closing those opportunity gaps only leads to more opportunity. What did we see when we talked about how the rainforest works? It's dense, it's lush, it's competitive, but it is mutually beneficial for everyone at all levels. It's delicate, but it works. So when we raise people up, when we give them the opportunity, and we've seen this happen. We're seeing it happen with the Syrian refugee community in Canada right now. People are starting businesses. People are going out. People are, moving forward. It's building the wealth of the nation. Also, which leads me to my final bit, and I'm a little bit ahead of schedule because it's very nerve-wracking being up here in front of all of you. I can't really see you, which is sad. I can see some of you, so if I've been focusing on some of you, it's because I can actually see you really well. It's not because I'm, staring at you or whatever. The last one, I think, the last opportunity space, or the last thing that we need to do before we can work with these opportunity spaces, is to raise wages or have better wages, but not credit, right? The average Canadian is carrying around record levels of debt. I think the number is something like $22,000 outside of the cost of housing. So outside of your mortgage, credit card debt. Meanwhile, I'm like, mortgages? Who can have those? Mortgages? What? That's like having a baby. That's a luxury item. Maybe, yeah. I've heard that before. I've heard that before. So it's certainly a thing. But in place of rising inflation, we haven't raised wages. We've only just given more credit, and we've kept interest rates low, which is to say that we've trapped people, especially young people, in mortgages that they will go underwater on. Meanwhile, their parents are writing off sort of disbursement checks in place of inheritance later to get them into condos and homes that they might not be able to afford, just so they can maybe have children, who then they probably can't afford anyway. That's a problem. And we can't expect people to pursue their ideas. We can't expect people to be leaders. We can't expect people to get out in front and pursue their ideas and pursue their passions, whether it's being artists or starting businesses or working in their communities, if they're ground down by debt. We just can't. We need to give people that freedom, and it is a financial freedom. It is a financial privilege. So I think that with all of that in place, when we spread that equity, when we develop those policies that become part of a social fabric, that become part of a culture, that become part of an identity about what Canada is, then we all have the opportunity to succeed. I think we're in a very interesting time right now where not only is it Canada 150, but one of our closest partners is going through an identity crisis, which means that we are going to go through an identity crisis. But it doesn't have to be a crisis. It can be a reaffirmation about who we are and what we want the next 150 years to be. Or rather, what we want the next 15,000 years to be. People have inhabited this place for 15,000 years. That's a lot of history to draw from. That's a lot of resiliency. And it's important to recognize that, to not just think 5 years ahead, or 10 years ahead, or 100 years ahead, or 150 years ahead. This is the only place we know about to live. Turtle Island is it. Spaceship Earth is it. So, with that in mind, I want to thank you again for allowing me to be here. I finished a little bit early, but I think that's okay. That'll keep us on time, at least, maybe. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere.
No, I won't go.
I'm just curious, do you know what year that a Canadian invented the jockstrap?
I would suspect that the jockstrap was probably an invention that other peoples were responsible for thousands of years ago.
Okay.
I suspect that everyone who's playing Aztec basketball thought of the jockstrap.
It's not lost on me that the jockstrap was invented about 75 years before the helmet.
And that's the problem. Am I right? That's the problem.
And then
Yeah.
and then the other point I had was about never giving up. And imagine if the person who had invented preparation G
H?
had given up. No, if he had given up at G.
Oh.
We wouldn't have had H.
There's another joke that I could make, but I won't.
Oh, yeah, please do.
No, never mind.
Anything from your book? I apologize because I'm going to read it. I got it at 1 o'clock on Monday, and I thought I'm going to find myself an outstanding quote to introduce you with. And at 1:30, I was in a board meeting for school trustees till 9 o'clock, a marathon budget meeting. And then this day job thing gets in the way on Tuesday. And I had another meeting last night, and that was on something else, so I didn't get to read it yet.
That's okay.
Is there something profound you can share with us out of the book?
I can pitch it. Well, I'll tell you what it's about. So Company Town is the story of a bodyguard for the United Sex Workers of Canada who lives on an oil rig in Newfoundland, 500 kilometers northeast of St. John's. So she lives in a city that floats on the Flemish Pass Basin. And a private family company comes and buys the city. And so she gets offered a job being a bodyguard for the heir apparent of the company, who appears to be getting death threats from the future. And then a bunch of murders happen. And she tries to solve them.
Okay.
So.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Can't wait. All right, we have time for questions, but rather than having somebody jump up and yell one out, we are actually filming this, and apparently you're not coming through too well when you don't use the microphone. So we do have mics on either side, and we will entertain questions or comments if you have one, but would appreciate if you use the microphone. Anything, any topic at all.
Okay.
Yes, Nolan.
Actually, I thank you. It's LeLacheur. I'd like to actually explore this. It's a science fiction book.
Yes.
So, describe why science fiction and today connect.
We're in a really interesting period where a lot of things are moving so quickly that a lot of my writer friends and I are having a hard time sort of staying ahead of things, which is why you'll see like this sort of influx of like really far future space opera stuff, because it's a lot easier to talk about the distant future rather than the near term or the midterm future. But the area that I work in is often called science fiction prototyping, where I write stories to help companies figure out what the implications are for a technology they have in development. So they give me a brief and say like, well, we think in 10 years this chipset will do this. What will be possible with it? And I say, well, okay, let me write a story about it. Or someone will say, here's my smart city plan. Here's a 150-page document for the smart city that we're planning on building. Can you write a story sort of set there? Because we want to know how humans might use it in a different way. Or alternatively, they want sort of they want a thing that they can show people that is easier to understand sometimes than a series of pie charts. Or might grab people in a different way than a report or an executive summary. So I often end up doing that, and I think that that's largely because a lot of science fiction sort of gets talked about a lot as the literature of ideas, and I just sort of think about it as the literature of change. I think that there are ideas in a bunch of different forms of literature and in a bunch of different forms of art. It's not just prose, but it can be film, it can be theater, it can be paint, it can be different media, and certainly people think about the implications of technology in a bunch of different genres, but science fiction is the one where people are really sort of used to dealing with that at the level of prose and used to having a story about that. So I think that it's very useful. It's becoming more and more useful, and I've had a lot of people sort of tell me like, oh well, we saw this coming, we saw this happening, we know how this might wind up. It's no accident that The Handmaid's Tale is extra relevant right now, and that the television adaptation of it is so popular, more popular perhaps than it would have been in any other year, because people are hungry to talk about the implications of that story, and possibly hungrier than they might have been in different circumstances. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that was the answer I had.
We've got one over here.
Madeline, thanks very much for being here today. Interesting presentation. But speaking of science fiction, we have a municipal election coming up here this fall.
Yes.
Earlier on, and credit to the candidates and maybe candidates that are here today to take this in. Earlier we were talking about linear government and some of the thinking that's it's very difficult for municipals, especially municipal governments, to keep up with the pace of innovation. Mm-hmm. Any advice on how we might kind of move that forward as a topic for discussion in the upcoming election? How could we make that kind of more relevant to the voters in our community?
Well, so my husband is a journalist who has been the president of the City Hall Press Gallery in Toronto for many, many years now. So when he comes home from work, all we talk about are municipal politics, which means that I have sort of an eye for how these things tend to go. And so what my policy recommendation for you would be to create a community council around innovation. Develop a community council who, and because community councils have meetings, they have public meetings, minutes are taken of those meetings, issues get brought up. And once you have that, it's part of the public record where counselors and others can, and chiefs of staff and so on can deal with them and often have to deal with them. You know, what I really like about watching municipal politics unfold is that you actually get to see how tiny changes can make such a huge impact on people. You know, whether it's like putting in a stoplight or putting in a stop sign or a crosswalk or something this tiny, again, that tiny little thing that makes a lot of people safer. You know, you can have that around innovation. Like, hey, we're building this center, but does it include everybody? Hey, we want funding for this project, but but it has the possibility to really violate people's rights. Do we really want to have that conversation? You know, do we really want to fund this? You know, when it's part of the community, suddenly you have that conversation in places that are bigger than this and have more people than this. Or, you know, you give people the opportunity to come and depute and talk about how something like that might impact them, which I think is really, really important and really doesn't happen. You know, we call it like beta testing or what have you, but that's, you know, a tiny limited box. So yeah, I would create a community council around it, honestly.
Question on this side.
Yes.
You were talking about renewable energy. How do
Yes.
you and solar panels and stuff. What renewable energy would you suggest that Sonaba used for that?
It's incredibly windy here. It's incredibly windy here. Build up those windmills. Yeah, and you do get a lot of sun. I'm jealous of that. I can see why they make all the westerns here now, because it looks like, you know, as though you know, it looks like something that John Huston would shoot, or John Ford. So I think that, yeah, I would build up windmills, and I would build up solar panels. I think that you know, Ontario just went through this massive sort of debacle over, like, should we build the windmills? What will we do about the windmills? Should people pay $2.50 more for the energy that they are devouring? Blah blah blah, which is ridiculous, because it's like, this is what we have. This is what we have to work with. We are running low on the stuff that we had to work with. Now we have more that we can work with. So it's sort of like, okay, well, we have these things in our stores, but we don't want to use them. We have this capacity. We have this talent, but we don't want to use them. It's like saying, like, well, I have this superpower, but some people don't like it, so that's why I don't fly. I mean, really? Would you do that? No, that's crazy. So use the superpower. Build the capacity.
Hi. Hi, I'm Brittany. I'm a student at University of Alberta. And so my question to you is, because you've got such an extensive background in all over Canada and really the States, how do you help people that aren't so willing to change in this new era of technology? How is your creative way of helping guide those people into the next era? I know a lot of, you know, older people are a little bit scared, so how do we help?
Well, I think that the first step is sort of recognizing that a lot of those fears are valid, right? There are a lot of fears about being constantly connected that are extremely valid. When we talk about, for example, the Internet of Things, there's a lot of capacity for mismanagement there. There's a lot of capacity for security issues there, and for privacy violations. Those are valid concerns. I think some people really want, before they sort of get sold on a concept or before they can fully embrace it, they want to hear that their anxieties about it really are valid, but here's where they should actually be placed. It's like, I know you're scared of this, but let's talk about real risk here. So I think having a meaningful conversation about risk and a meaningful conversation that's empathetic is the first step. When IDEO usually does, like, it's part of the IDEO sort of design philosophy and is part of a lot of human-centered design work, is to start with empathy and start with a huge amount of research, saying, like, okay, but what is your lived experience? When we start with lived experience, suddenly the backstory of the fear begins to make a lot more sense. Rather than saying, oh, don't you want this shiny thing? Don't you want the shiny thing that's constantly broadcasting your location to everyone everywhere, including your ex-boyfriend who might be a little unhinged? You know, that was girls around me. That's location services. I mean, it's a real thing. So talk about real risk, and figure out what people's real fears are, and work with them there.
Hi. There's been a lot of questions today around education, and I'm more interested in kind of maybe the post-secondary. And you know, we've had this reality where you can be, you know, from 18 to 22, go to university, and then you're good to go for a whole career. You know, we think that's really ending, or the process of ending.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that whole education for life and making sure that we, you know, we're able to scale ourselves up just as the rest of everything else is rapidly changing?
Well, what I've seen among my students is a real hunger for real-world experience. That's what they want. They want to develop. They want to develop their skills. They want to do things like internships and co-ops. They want to do things where they are out in the community doing work. They do want to learn the basics, and they're incredibly. My students that I taught this past term, I was teaching 3 courses at 2 universities, and my students were among some of the most meticulous, hungry, driven, smart people that I had ever interacted with. But there's this interesting paradox between a desire to get out and do the work, but also a risk aversion. You know, keep in mind that a lot of these students were entering high school or leaving high school or had sort of significant life changes around 2008. Their parents probably lost jobs. They may have had to move. They are consumed with the idea of doing it the right way. And that doesn't initiate an open mindset that allows for the possibility of failure. And when we don't teach people how to fail, that means that their inevitable failure is shattering. So giving people a low-stakes place to learn their skills and prototype for failure and understand that a setback is not failure is really important. I had some students who I sort of charged with doing innovation workshops actually with their own clients, doing creativity or collaborative workshops with their own clients. And I told them to hunt down their clients themselves, told them to do all the work, most of the work on their own, using processes that we workshopped in the classroom, and so on. And for 9 weeks, they thought I was full of it. 9 or 10 weeks, they thought I was completely off my rocker. And then I got the presentations back, and they're like, it was just like you said. I'm like, well, yeah, because I've done it. But they hadn't. And in an environment where there are so many school activities, where everybody's in soccer, everybody's in dance, everybody is in cram school, everybody's learning another thing, and no one is getting those little retail jobs that I grew up with, that being out in the real world is harder and harder to do. We talk a lot about like, oh, they're in their screens, they're not interacting with the real world. And it's like, well, think about what the real world is. By what do you mean the real world? And stuff. And are we really giving people the opportunity to interact with it? So that's one of the things that I would focus on is granting more real world experience to people, because they are hungry for it and they do want to do it.
I had just one other question.
Yes.
Over here. I'm over here. Way over here.
Yeah, there you are. Sorry.
Like you, I'm a transplant from down south.
Okay.
And with the recent problems that they're having with the hacking and everything, I'm wondering what technology would Canada be able to be a leader in safeguarding, because just this young lady's point about so many people don't want to be on the internet and all like that because it's too easy to grab their information, troll them. All of these things are very scary. So is that something that Canada is working towards, or is it something that we can attract those type of people to put in those type of safeguards so that we don't end up here with the same problems that happen down south?
The government has said that they are working on that they are working to safeguard elections electronically and through other means. There are about 3 different things that you need to do to fight that. One is to enhance voting rights for everyone. Granting everyone smoother voting rights, easier voting rights, making voter registration easy, allowing permanent residents like me to vote, and other things would enhance the participation of in the voting populace. 2, we also need to fund journalism. We need to fund it like it's an art form, because it is. You know, you may hear something about that from Post Media later. I used to work for them, and then there wasn't the money, so I couldn't. So, you know, fund journalism, fund truth, fund facts. Because when you fund truth, you fund justice. It's no accident that truth and reconciliation go together. There can't be justice without truth, right? We're currently investigating the deaths of missing and murdered Indigenous women, but we can't do that without facts. We can't have justice for those women without facts, without investigation. So we need to fund those things. And then we also need to work on the security piece. We have to secure our infrastructure, both the voting infrastructure and the information infrastructure. We have to make sure that people aren't getting, you know, taken advantage of. And fourth, there's a cultural piece where we sort of look at, you know, okay, well, let's talk about what Canada really is. You know, let's not fall into divisiveness. Or if there are divisions, let's talk about the actual genuine divisions that there are. What are the lived experiences of people on the fringes? You know, what is the lived experience of people who are suffering? Let's actually, sort of similar to the how do we get people to sort of move forward, I think it comes from listening to a lot of that suffering and sort of saying, okay, well, where does that come from? But I guarantee you that if you initiate the things like UBI, like closing the wage gap, like raising wages instead of just giving out credit, a lot of that suffering is going to decrease. And you'll see not just more voters, but voters who are excited about voting. And I think that, no? The clock keeps moving forward.
We've got time. Question over there?
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Dennis Nicholson. I live here in St. Albert, a resident, retired, old guy. Anyway, I certainly have...
Yeah.
Okay. I certainly was interested in your Innovation Council. Was it Innovation Council you mentioned?
For a community council around innovation, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I was wondering, are there any best practices that would, you know, lead the way? Some of us old guys may not have time to develop a process.
I don't know. I would look at other successful community councils in the area. Like, there are usually community councils, or either around specific issues or around neighborhoods. Certainly, that's how the City of Toronto does it. But and there have been things written about that. But there are other community councils sort of all over Canada, and I would look at sort of what makes them work. And I would look at what makes municipal policy work in general and work with that. If you want to work at the municipal level, you have to look at what works in municipal policy. And often it's just like, it's like anything else, it's habit. It's regular meetings. It's making the same choices over and over again. The thing about, you know, executive committees and community councils is that they meet regularly, rain or shine, whether or not they have something to discuss or not, because inevitably there is always something to discuss, and that's how, you know, things get done. So I think making something a habit is, I have a friend who says habits are what you get for free, or habits are things you get for free, and so I think building in a capacity is extremely important. I think that might be it.
Don't worry about that clock.
I was timing myself based on this.
Over there? We're good? Any other questions? No? Well, again, Madeline. Madeline, I want to thank you so much. You can find out more. You can find Madeline at madelineashby.com.
Yes, I will update that blog, I swear.
And let's hear it for one more time for Madeline. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. You can, well, you know what? There's stairs right there. Just watch your step. I don't know where. If you go out the side doors, I have no idea where you're going to end up.
I'll find out.
Okay. I think you can circle back around. So we're a tiny bit ahead of schedule, but I think everybody's in place. So let's just keep going. And so at this point in time, if I can, Brian, if you're ready, I'd like to bring back to the stage for the next segment the volunteer chair of the board of the St. Albert, Greater St. Albert and District Chamber of Commerce, Brian Baczynski.
Thank you, Joe. Well, it's time for our panel discussion. And if I could ask our panelists to take the stage. Yep, go ahead. Okay, first off, we have Richard Iwaniuk. Richard, if you could just raise your hand there. Richard is our moderator for the panel. Richard is the Vice President, Finance and Business Operations for the Blind Enthusiasm Brewery Company. Richard is a chartered accountant, former leader at video game developer BioWare. He is also a past chair for the St. Albert Economic Development Advisory Board, among other volunteer boards. Please join me in welcoming Richard. And our first panelist is Reid Johnson, the co-founder of Core Network Solutions. In his role, Reid collaborates with the likes of Edmonton Airports, Alberta Innovates, Disney, and Fairmont Hotels. Reid is also the chair of Economic Development Advisory Committee for St. Albert, and he is the president of the St. Albert Canadian Progress Club. Please join me in welcoming Reid. Next we have Rob LeLacheur, who is the manager of content solutions for Post Media Network. Rob has over 20 years' experience in various media roles and leadership positions in the entertainment and event business. Along with his work, Rob is a well-known member of the community and involved in organizations and events across St. Albert. Please join me in welcoming Rob. Last but not least, we welcome back Dar Schwanbeck, who again is the managing director of the Northern Alberta Business Incubator located in St. Albert. Please join me in welcoming Dar back to the stage. Richard, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Brian. Welcome, everyone, and thanks again to you and our panelists for joining in our talk this afternoon on fostering local innovation and the ecosystems needed to support it. It was an interesting exercise for me preparing for moderating this panel. The word innovation itself can mean so many different things to different people, as we've heard a lot of today. For example, prior to my current role, I spent 16 years in the video game industry, where innovation was typically technologically focused, which is really only a small subset of the areas that you can innovate upon. So I jumped onto Google to see if I could find a widely accepted definition of innovation. The shortest definition I found simply stated the action of process of innovating. Thanks for that, Oxford Dictionary. But in all seriousness, I quickly discovered over 40 different definitions for innovation. While they shared thematic similarities, many different types of innovation have been defined across all aspects and process and all types of industries. And I actually think that's the cool thing about innovation. It embodies new ideas, it embodies opportunities that anyone can discover. And it is there that I'd like to start the questions with our panelists. So I'm going to lean over to you, Reid, first. Question number one, how do you view innovation and how do you foster it within your organization?
Well, first I'm going to say I saw that it said we're an expert panel. I don't know where I got the title expert from. I'm a technology guy, so I guess that makes me an expert. Pretty simple. How I view innovation is pretty basic. I take an idea or a thing, and I want to make it better, so I come up with either a process or a new technology. The more interesting question to me is how do I foster it? And whether it's in my business or some of my other activities, the first thing I do is I make sure to keep an open mind. And I learned this in 2008. So I started my company in 2003. Prior to that, I worked for a company based out of Edmonton, and the founder of the company had this great idea. He said, we're going to change the way that people communicate online. We're going to have them post pictures. We're going to have them carry on discussions with their family. And people are going to connect all around the world. And I said, that sounds kind of ridiculous. And that was in 2003. And when was Facebook founded? Does anybody know? 2004. So we could have had Facebook out of Edmonton. The other thing I like to do in the business is I rely on my people. And I open it up to them because we can't all be experts everywhere. And I say, what problem are we trying to solve? And how are we going to solve it? Sometimes it's a little tweak. Sometimes it's technology. As a technology guy, sometimes I focus a little too much on the technology. I think that's probably the most basic answer I could give you.
Thanks, Reid. Dar, from your perspectives at NABI and your experience.
So, from our perspective, I'm obviously a fan of systems and processes.
You're going to have to go right into that microphone. Get it right angles to your lips.
Right there?
Better.
Is that better? All right. So, how do I view innovation? I'm always looking for a practical, positive impact on customers. So, I really encourage all of our staff to dig deeply, ask why a lot. The first time the customer or the employee or whatever it is, frankly, they are going to lie to you. So you have to keep asking why about 5 times before you start getting at the truth. And it's only once you've got the truth that you can start to think about changing your products or your processes in an unexpected way so that they see lower complexity and improved benefit. And the familiar may appear new to them, but the toaster still makes toast. Innovation should result in some benefit to the customer. Sustainable innovation should address priority customer desired outcomes, outcomes to be achieved or avoided. And we're all really good at knowing what we want to avoid, but we're not so sure about how to create them. How do we foster it? Well, I'm a fan of systems, obviously. I spent too long at this not to know that if you have a system and a process, and preferably one system and one process, and then stick to it until you get some results. And maybe a couple of practical tips I would share is please do away with these things called surveys, or at least in the current form, because these things take up a lot of time and they really don't drive improvement. There's 2 of them here that I just recently received in the past week, and you couldn't use them to improve the communities where we live. The last kind of tongue-in-cheek thing, but very seriously, how do you foster it? Add millennials to your team. Go start embracing young people and talking to them.
Rob, from your perspective.
Okay, thanks. Well, I was thinking about starting a survey company. But
you know what I don't like about survey companies? They all have like, but they don't have unlike or dislike.
Really, the only thing going through my brain right now is how to become better friends with Richard. You know, video games and beer. Like, I need to be friends with him. But you know, a couple thoughts with how I view innovation, and you know, I guess to me a lot of it is a constant. We talked about process and ideas and new products, new technology, and for me it never ends, and you're always looking at it. And I kind of drive myself, and I know it's common and many do, but you know, a delivery plus one. And to me, that is steady growth in your innovation. And sometimes we think too far ahead, and the fear of making that big a change. But if it's just a constant improvement upon it, a bit more palatable, and manage to do that. Another big one for me is differentiation in how you innovate. The tools are becoming so plentiful today. Everybody has access to so many things that are quite common, and really forcing, you know, our community, our organizations, our businesses, even us as individuals, how do we differentiate ourselves from others? Kurian, who spoke earlier, he shared a line with me many years ago. I don't know if it was his, but I'll give him credit for it now. And that was, there's difference in degree, and that's a little bit, you know, we're a bit better, we're a bit cheaper, a bit faster, a bit better good looking. If you're next to the mayor, you're a lot better good looking. Versus always focused on a difference in kind. And if you take that focus on difference in kind in what you do, it will truly set you apart in your innovation.
Yeah, and I think those are very good points, in that fostering that culture, and whether that's through the people that you hire, through reinforcing those types of behaviors, are incredibly important if that's the type of organization that you want to drive, and you want to drive innovation within it. What what innovation hurdles or barriers do you see for yourself? And it can be specifically to your organization, but certainly in the context or the lens of us here in St. Albert, what are some of the challenges that are specific to St. Albert? And Rob, I'll hand that back to you to continue with those.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, I thought about this more in the light of for our community. And I think a hurdle, a barrier we need to concern ourselves with is fear and decision. We live in a pretty loud world right now with social media, and everything is under constant view and review. And with that, I believe it's scaring people to sometimes make bold innovations, to want to step out and go ahead, because so many people are wanting to look backwards in the approach to what you've done, that unfortunately it's going to drive people to not innovate. And you know, it's better to be quiet and just stay out of the way. And so that definitely is a concern. Because again, it's loud. You know, in many of my past roles, when I ask the question, what don't you like, what bugs you, you know, questions like that, I would get a lineup out the door and around the building, like everyone just willing to step up with bells on. But when you ask the question, how do we fix this, how do we make it better, it's a much smaller line. So, you know, I worry about fear and decision. Another bit, and as mentioned earlier, I work for Post Media, and we're in the newspaper business, and if you haven't heard, we're being disrupted a little. Our model's being changed, but sometimes fear and innovation. And by that, I mean that, you know, look at your own community, your own business, your own roles, and try to look at it from a disruption point of view to I guess, be the one to provide that disruption so you can make a bit of a plan to overcome it. Because rest assured, someone is going to be more than happy to disrupt it for you, and they're working to do that. And I think that, you know, our industry did not work to disrupt itself for a long period of time, and now we're being forced into renewing it. So I talk to our team a lot about, I realize it's scary, it's fear-driven. It's hard to reveal your weaknesses to show your strengths, but sometimes you have to do that. You have to step out before, because unfortunately, if you don't and others reveal it for you, you're now from the 8-ball position. You're working from behind. So those are a couple thoughts.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point about the different types of innovation, and disruptive innovation is one of those ones that are talked about a lot. And I think when people think of that type of innovation from my day and age, it was Apple bringing the computer to the home. But a more recent example is Uber, and bringing a significantly simpler model for people to be able to transport themselves around. So I think that those are very good points. Thank you. Dara, I'll throw that back to you now as well.
So what innovation hurdles or barriers? In 20 years of doing this work, one of the things we've learned is that most of the hurdles or the barriers we face are actually self-imposed, or the technology does not exist yet. So we don't have a cure for cancer yet, but the belief that we can cure it or not becomes a hurdle. And a lot of those hurdles are what my colleague Lawton has characterized as vital lies. And vital lies are the barriers or hurdles on any change initiative. Things like, we don't have control over that. Satisfaction will occur if dissatisfaction declines. Customers don't know what they want. We know what customers want, so we don't have to go talk to them. So those are just some of the vital lies that are self-imposed. We don't take it on, but that's our challenge. We either believe we can or we can't. I think the other hurdle that we face is that we don't take time to get clear about outcomes that customers want, and we don't prioritize them. We've got to narrow our focus on the future down to a few things that we want to do. And then we go after those things. And I fear that a lot of organizations today have become way more situational. They, as Rob said, we get too much information, and we take our eye off the ball responding to endless series of problems. So instead of being that reactive kind of culture, Let's establish one that's proactive. Let's decide what we want in St. Albert, pick those few priorities, and go there. The good news is that the outcomes customers and taxpayers want are pretty stable things. They're stable over time. We want health, we want entertainment, we want great commutes on St. Albert Trail. So those things are stable. The technology changes, but the outcomes are stable. So if we can anchor our conversation around outcomes and priorities, it takes away a lot of the fear, I think.
I think one of the earlier things that you said at the start was referring to what I call the velocity of change, and that is a reality, is that velocity is continuing to increase. And I think that kind of folds into a bit to what you were saying, Rob, in the context of letting fear be a hurdle. And the reality is we have to accept that change is increasing at an increasing pace. Reid, what are your thoughts?
Well, Dar took my answer, so.
Next question.
Thanks. So
that's the game up here, isn't it?
I think that some of the barriers and hurdles that I see are, the first one, as Dar alluded to, is that why are we doing this? What's the outcome? In my industry, a lot of the time we get stuck on the, hey, this thing is shiny and cool, let's get it. And we don't think about what the outcome and the long-term effect should be. When I'm speaking specifically to municipalities, and I have several municipalities as, I think it's, oh, there we go. I have several municipalities as clients, and some of the hurdles that we run into when we're trying to get information out to the residents or create and foster environments for innovation is, number one, bureaucracy. Unfortunately, I hate to say that, but sometimes our innovation is ahead of where our municipalities are as far as area structure plans and that type of thing, as well as our physical environment. In my business, I have people that come from all over the world to work for me, and we are in St. Albert. And that actually is a hurdle, not because it's St. Albert. St. Albert is a beautiful place. It's a lovely place to live, but we have this thing called snow. And I have people from Nigeria, I have people from Africa, and we're losing a lot of those resources down to the places like Silicon Valley as far as technology innovation. Those are some of the things that I see.
That actually segues back to the previous presentation that we had, and certainly from my video game experience, one of the challenges that we had was immigration of talent. A lot of the online technologies that BioWare or other video game developers are trying to develop are actually technologies that have been in place in the Asia-Pacific region for several years. So I agree that bringing people in a timely fashion without incredible hurdles to bring them here would be certainly helpful in driving innovation, especially on the technological front. So considering what we have heard here today and your individual experiences, what top 3 innovation priorities would you recommend for communities to support future economic success? And guess what, Dar, it's your turn to go first.
I'm not sure what the specific priorities would be. The process that I imagine is setting wildly outlandish goals for innovation. And the reason that's important is that if we struggle with incremental things, it doesn't take us out of the box in terms of how we think about the problem. So by setting wildly outlandish goals for innovation, and I'll give you a few examples in a minute, we do change that conversation. So here might be some examples. 0 homelessness. So we want, everybody's got to have a roof over their head of some kind. And I know that Mayor Mandel a few years ago took that on in the city of Edmonton. I think we're making progress. My daughter works there as a program coordinator. So every day she has a clientele of homeless folks. And they go out of their ways to make sure this roof stays over their head. So one of the things that happens on check day, or the day that these folks get paid, is they like to go out and have a bottle or drink or two, and they get drunk. And so if they get drunk, they'll get kicked out of their accommodation. So what Jennifer and her team do is they rent hotels for those people during the days they're going to be drunk, and then they take them back to their apartment. And in my view, that's innovation, right? You know, you have to work the system. So 0 goals for homelessness. How about 0 carbon emissions? That'd be a wildly ambitious goal. A third one might be 1 step to get information you need at City Hall. I don't know. It's a tough crowd, right? Yeah. How about one key to get the information you need? How about 0 emergency room visits? What would we have to do to achieve that outcome? So by establishing that goal, the next thing, or that big picture goal, the next thing, how would we measure that? And then we take some time to brainstorm the things. What are the 2 or 3 things we'd have to fix, change, or modify to achieve that? And that new list of projects drives all sorts of innovation.
Interesting, breaking the barriers to open the mind.
Yep. Yes.
Rob.
Well, on the 0 hospital visits, I have 4 kids, so my punch card is I'm almost out of free coffee. So
Are you?
I've been there quite a few times, but that'd be a great one. I
But
think
what would you have to do differently? What would happen?
not have kids.
Oh. All right.
And if they're watching this video by some chance, I don't mean you guys. I'm not talking about you. As I tell you all each individually, you're my favorite. So just a few thoughts. I live and work in the communication business, and I was fortunate to spend a lot of time working with the city staff here, with the brand, and the work of Roger Brooks, and I really enjoyed that. And so part of it is on our external communication of how we talk about ourselves. I've shared this with my friends here at the city, so it's no surprise to them, but I'm a huge supporter. I love smart city initiatives, all of those things. I absolutely hate it when I hear it publicly as St. Albert is a smart city. When I go back to the work that we did, a simple exercise was blank out the city and then name where it is. So welcome to blank the smart city, or along those lines, and back to that, differentiate ourselves. So in no ways am I trying to say abandon smart city initiatives, but I'm saying how we choose to communicate to external groups that we just need to be wary of how we set ourselves apart from others. So just one approach that I would definitely encourage as we do that. Something internally. Share a story with you. I remember one day I was at the bank, and all the tellers we were chatting, and I just said, "Boy, big couple weekends coming up in St. Albert," and they all looked at me with blank stares, and they had no idea what was going. And I believe it was Rainmaker Rodeo and the Children's Festival. And so if you look at that, and this is more a business community communication. From the Chamber of Commerce, from economic development, our communications is kind of like an iceberg approach, where it's the owners, it's the executives, the managers that receive the majority of the communication, but there's all these frontline folks. And if you think of the power of our community knowing everything that's going on, obviously I'm talking about some tourism initiatives, but I think the more we can create good communication too, realize, like, I'm not saying let's pump out a 4-pager and expect everyone to read it each day, but in my past I spent some time in the gaming industry. I worked at the casino here in St. Albert, and we would do a pre-shift each day with all the staff, and of course in our world you talk about the steak dinners on special tonight, but we would make sure that all the frontline staff knew that, hey, Rockin' August is coming, and so that type of community information, and I'd really encourage that out there. And then another, when we talk about smart city and innovation, and I only read one side of the story, so my apologies if there's a bigger part to it, but there was a story recently about a business in one of our 2 business parks that is enjoying 28K modem internet. And honestly, I look at that as we need to look at some of our extreme baseline offerings, and before we get too far ahead of ourselves and thinking too far ahead, something like this is just a big anchor that we need to take care of. So I definitely encourage fixing that.
Over to you, Reid.
Well, now Rob stole my answer, so I don't know what I'm going to say. So the three top priorities for me, the first one has nothing to do with technology, and this is applicable across several municipalities, and it's been alluded to, is process. If we want to impact our economic success as a municipality, we need to make it easy for businesses to come into our municipality and open up shop. I'm not saying that we need to let every type of business in, like a lay-down yard for pipe and that kind of thing, but we need to make the process of getting development permits easy. We need to make sure that we make sure our business licenses are easy to get a hold of. So that has been a bit of a challenge for some organizations in multiple municipalities. The second one is transportation. So if we're trying to open up big new shops like the new AGLC, we need to make sure that we have proper transportation throughout our community, and that's not just the roadways but the controls, and the Smart City Initiative has that right in its crosshairs, right? City of St. Albert's installing fiber, they're modifying the way that they're doing their signaling, they're doing the ability for emergency vehicles to move through faster, and maybe at some point we'll be able to do that with transit as well as with trucking. So I think that that's important. And then the last point is, I agree with you. We need to be careful about how we position Smart City, and St. Albert shouldn't only be about Smart City. When it comes to Smart City, we need to keep in mind that we need to reevaluate every once in a while what is actually important and why we're doing it and what the outcome is. When we talk about these businesses that have 28K modems, I'd like to know where it is, because we have the technology in all of our business parks in St. Albert to get those connections there. The question is the business willing to pay for it? And a lot of the times, my background prior to opening my company, I was the infrastructure manager for the second largest online dating service in the world, which was pretty fun. Prior to that, I came from the ISP industry. So I managed a national network for a small carrier. And the technology is there and we can get it there, but it costs a lot of money. And we need to make sure that we get there. Now, am I saying that the city should become an ISP and the city should put fiber in the ground to businesses? I've done a lot of research in that area, and I don't know that that's a good idea. But I do think that we need to keep that momentum going, and we need to talk about that smart city. We are the botanical arts city, so I think that should be in the forefront. But the work that the city has been doing to go out and say, hey, you know what, we're thinking about this. We're trying not to be a Me Too, and we're trying to stay ahead of the curve. I think we have a little ways to go still, but at least we're somewhat on track.
Well, that segues well into the next question and the final question that we have. What can be done to support or catalyze these priorities, and what are the roles of the public sector, the private sector, and some of the other areas? I'm going to throw that to you, Rob. Over to you, Rob.
Yeah, and just quickly, I agree. I don't see, it's not a city fix, but it's a work quickly, because to find a solution between business, between government, because as long as something is, like, it's such an Achilles heel just sitting there to what we're trying to do overall. So really on the push, probably I'd go back to that communication side, and I've done a lot of work with the city, with the Chamber of Commerce, and just really pushing for the deepening of that communication into as many lines as we can, and I really believe in the power of the more people that know, the stronger all of our messages are going to get, both, you know, internally for our own residents, what's going on in our own community, to, of course, externally, you know, being able to, there's only one mayor who can run around and tout all the great benefits of our community, but if 65,000 are doing it all day, every day, it becomes pretty powerful that way. So I'd really encourage looking for new ways to not replace but enhance some of our communication.
Dar.
An interesting, complex question, I think. My sense is that this requires a change of mindset, a belief that we can or we can't. And so we need the mindset to change the culture first. We need to believe we can do something. We need to, our culture needs to get connected to that dream or whatever that is, or those big goals. But a strong belief that you need a culture that believes it can. And for example, this might be the mistake that Uber has made. It's busy changing the technology really fast, but it didn't set out to bring the culture along with it. So I don't know. We'll see, right?
Maybe with the change in CEO, it'll help.
It addressed, it introduced the technology, but it did not address the underlying culture that made it, that might make it sustainable. I guess it comes down to political will and leadership, perhaps to try things and trust that there might be a better process. For some reason, most food caterers still believe that putting the buffet table up against the wall is the right thing to do, so we have, single processing. But when we pull the tables out, we have parallel processing, which gets the food line faster. But guess what? There's even a third better way, which would reduce cycle time even by another 80%, and that's by breaking the tables up into islands. But now what we need to do, we have trained everybody to form lines to get food. So we need to change the culture from forming lines to just go to any one of those tables and take whatever you want. So we take all those tables that we saw at lunch and take them apart and just spread them around. Now people can get their food in about 20% of the time it took us today, but we've got to change the culture of the customer and of the producer. So, yeah.
Thanks, Tar. Started with you, Reid. We'll end with you.
Okay. I think that one of the ways that we can create a catalyst is to engage some of our local companies, right? We've got some really skilled organizations in St. Albert, and nobody knows about them. And they are very creative. So maybe if the municipalities, there's rules around this. I mean, we all have to follow the rules. But maybe we could start looking at different ways to collaborate. And you see that more with organizations like NABI. So, we happen to have an organization that's based in St. Albert that does fiber optics, right? Do they have any creative ideas? Can they lay something, instead of directional drilling and laying in sewer, maybe we do surface fiber just inside the curb. I think that we miss out on a lot of opportunities to get this innovation rolling because we're so focused on the big name, right? I want to talk to Cisco. I want to talk to not necessarily HP, but we're focusing on Cisco and that type of thing. When it comes to the technology piece, let's see what the local companies can come up with and see what they will do when they're forced to make a change, right? Back to internet issues. We're forced to come up with creative ways. We're forced to use microwave technology or lasers where we don't have that type of infrastructure in place.
If I can just jump in with an example,
Please do.
One of the ones, and thank you for the NABI plug. We get to see these things just about every day, and it's wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could? We have two companies in the wastewater treatment, tailings water treatment business, and these are both, in a big picture, really small companies. But very innovative technologies, and what they need is a chance to prove it on the world stage. Municipalities are probably the slowest on the planet to adopt wastewater treatment technology, and yet we have technology right here in St. Albert that could probably reduce the cost of wastewater treatment by 60 or 80%. So we need to find ways to enable the proving of that technology. And so that's what I kind of like about the smart city stuff. Let's get some pilot stuff going around that. And of course, the first thing we hear is, well, the Municipal Government Act won't allow us to do that. Well, damn it, let's go down to wherever we need to go and change that. So.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to say that it needs funding and it needs commitment. And whether that funding comes from the city or from the province or federally, there are funds available, or even just hiring somebody within the city organization that can focus on finding these funds.
The technologies we're talking about here, it wouldn't take any funding. Just give us the opportunity. Just divert 0.1% of your sewage so we can prove that we can do it for 80% less. And why wouldn't you want to do that, right?
Thank you. Any final words from the panel? I'd like to start with you, Reid, if you have anything else you want to add. We have 8 minutes.
Can I
have a
talk about
joke.
race cars for 8 minutes? Because that's innovation, and I really like race cars, and I know you like cars, so. Back in 1940, this guy put this thing called nitromethane in an engine, and that was a perfect example of innovation. And you know, I have a need to go faster. What's the outcome? I'm either going to go faster or blow up, and it's just pushing innovation. So it's keep an open mind and think outside that box, and don't let anyone get in your way. But I would always encourage to ask why. Why am I doing this? What is the outcome? Who is going to be affected? What's the end goal? And then measure it. Measure it all along the way back to the, in our industry, Dar, we call it the wildly important goals from Sean Covey. Measure all along the way to make sure you're on track so that we can make our little adjustments. And I think that that's important whenever we're looking at process as well as technology.
Dar, any final words?
It's an exciting city to live in. I'm delighted to be part of the innovation process almost on an everyday basis. I just really would welcome more collaboration. Come talk to us. Let's explore how we can do stuff. I'd love to be known as the can-do city. I'd love to be known as the funnest city to work in Canada. Years ago, I was involved with the Calgary Airport when they decided to be the friendliest airport in North America. And it was just one little place to focus our, you know, let's be the most friendly small business city in North America. We got 2,500 competitors, so what are we going to do to be different? And I have a joke if we have time left, but I'll over to Rob.
Rob, final word.
How long's the joke? How long you need there, Dar?
I just need a minute.
I think, you know, back to the fear side, it's just talking openly about, you know, mistakes are okay. And we need to have good positive dialogue as we move towards innovating. And, you know, everyone's going to have their opinion. They're going to weigh in that. But as long as we as a group just keep talking about how we can innovate going forward, we're going to make some mistakes along the way. And you know, there's an old saying of fire those that don't make any mistakes, because it just clearly shows that they're not trying to step out. They're not trying to do anything innovative. And, you know, that's where you get, I think it's dangerous ground when everyone shrinks into that middle and doesn't want to step out in any way for fear of reprisals. So I would just really encourage that. And you know, I love St. Albert. My family loves St. Albert. It's a great community, and always proud to be involved with it. So, you know, great dialogue today, and, you know, kudos to all the organizers and everyone that put this on, because this is the really good dialogue that's going to move us ahead. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you. And I'll just go back to what I said at the start, and 40 different definitions in a very short period of time of looking on the internet. And I said that they shared similarities, and some of those similarities, they all talk about reducing costs, making incremental improvements, radically simplifying markets. Every one of those all involve execution. It's about delivering. It's about doing something about it. And that's what I would encourage all of you when you're thinking about innovation. It's not just the ideas. It's figuring out the path to execution. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Dar, for your final word.
I have one serious thought. This was brought to us by a guy named Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO of Microsoft from 2000 to 2014. And Ballmer said, "We can believe that we know where the world should go, but unless we're in touch with our customers, our model of the world can diverge from reality. There's no substitute for innovation, of course, but innovation is no substitute for being in touch either." So that's the serious note. And then, you know, you either embrace technology or you don't. This story was called The Last Evacuation Drill. A fire alarm rang at 4 p.m. in a large office campus when almost all the employees were present, approximately 5,000. As per past fire drill practices, the entire office was quickly evacuated within 3 minutes, and all employees gathered at the muster point outside the complex, waiting for further announcement. Before long, the fire drill officer in charge made the following broadcast over the loudspeaker system. My dear colleagues, with sincere regret, because you do not embrace innovation, I have been asked to announce that for many of you, this will be your last evacuation drill. Due to the ongoing recession and bad business climate, the company is laying off 50% of its staff. So when this announcement finishes, I ask all of you to move back into the building. And if your swipe card does not work, it means you have been laid off. In which case, you will not be allowed inside. All of your personal belongings will be couriered to you tomorrow. The company is using this innovative, never-before approach, as we do not want to choke our email system with layoff notices and farewell messages by the thousands. And we also want to avoid any infighting and fighting inside the office, which the security will have to deal with. We hope you have a rewarding career with us. Now please move back in, and good luck.
That's a joke.
Well, it's kind of like that farmer that realized that chicken legs are the best part of the chicken, and so he developed that three-legged chicken, and when asked, well, how does it taste? He says, I have no idea, I can't catch them. So, enough levity. It's been an honor to sit up here with you gentlemen. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody. That concludes this round table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name's Jennifer McCurdy. I'm with the St. Albertan District Chamber of Commerce. Brian had to leave, so he did ask me to come in. And I'd like to thank Richard for moderating this session. I know it's not an easy group to control, but you did very well. And thank you to our panelists, Reid, Rob, and Dar. We value your generosity in sharing your time and expertise today. Thank you. And some takeaways. Fostering innovation. Reid, you said keep an open mind. Dar, you said ask why a lot. And Rob, you said constant improving, delivery +1. And I think that's very sage advice. One I will take back to the chamber is don't be afraid to look at your weaknesses. By doing this, you will find and develop new strengths. So I thank you for that. This does end this portion of the summit. We will be taking a break and then moving into our round tables. But before that, it's not a survey, but we do have a couple of questions for you. So we'd like you all to take out your smartphone, please. And you can snap on the QR code or download the URL or type in the URL and go to our non-survey questions. There's a couple of quick, short questions, so if everybody could do that, then we will not send you out an annoying survey tomorrow saying, how did you like us? Dar, do you have your smartphone out?
Embrace technology.
Are they done? Everybody done?
Good, we're done.
I think. You got your questions answered. We are going to be taking a quick refreshment break for those participating in the round tables. Oh, okay, here, it's coming up. Pour. That's okay.
Could we not have done this before our session?
There's 3 questions. Can we go back to the other screen and put the URL on? Some people had a hard time typing that in.
Chris, it's etc/JV_R_M.
20 after?
Yeah, 20 after.
And are you able to bring up the results again, just so people can see? I think that, well, there's another question. Are there other questions coming up on the screen? Okay, should the future innovation summits be held? Yes.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, well, we are going to go for a brief refreshment break. For those participating in the roundtables, you have a red circle on your name tag. That's how you know that you signed up for the roundtables. And we will be coming back up on the stage at about 2:20. And for those not participating, we thank you for coming. And we hope that we will see you again next time. Thank you.